Professor Tony Phillips, our guest. He's former head of the psychology department at UBC. He is currently with the Canadian Institute of Health Research and with the Brain Behavior Lab at UBC. Right. You wear many hats.
Too many.
Too many hats, but that's good because this is exciting science, although we don't understand it completely. Why is it important we study it?
Well, one of the puzzles in biology has been how to attribute environmental factors versus genetic factors to our health and behavior. And epigenetics finally gives us an approach that may resolve this issue.
I'm suspecting over the years that scientists and researchers didn't give it much respect.
Epigenetics.
Epigenetics.
Yes, because it really implies a revolution in the way in which we think about our genes and how they influence our behavior and our very being. One of the implications is that every cell in our body has the identical genetic code, and it's immutable. It's slow evolution over generations and millennia that led us to be,
who we are.
Who we are. This implies that the genes can be influenced on a much shorter time scale, and therefore, factors, as we were discussing earlier, around nutrition, the quality of mothering, the extent of stress that occurs in our life, it now appears as though they can affect the way in which our genetic code is read.
Sure, the extent of stress or how we handle the stress.
Yes, yeah.
Either or. What about a fetus, an unborn child?
Right.
What happens to the mother, what the mother eats, what the mother is exposed to?
These are factors
in the field?
Absolutely. It's not only the mother, it's also the father.
Guess we have to include him.
You do indeed.
Yes.
And there are some studies that have shown that young boys that began to smoke heavily around the time of puberty, their offspring were much lighter and had shorter lives. And there may be a vulnerability around puberty. Men are not born with the ability to create sperm from birth. That only occurs at puberty. And there's a vulnerable period there where the genetic code that's contained in sperm could be influenced by environmental factors. And that in turn could affect the offspring of that father.
But how fascinating that what you did at 15 behind the barn when you had your first cigarette.
Or even 11.
Or even at 11, eventually could affect the health or the genetics of your child.
Yes. And we're talking about excessive smoking, not experimenting with the odd cigarette.
No, alcohol too, I'm
yes,
sure.
Yeah. And also nutrition. That experiment we talked about, or that event we talked about earlier about the famines in northern Sweden in the last century, they also were able to determine that if the mother experienced a famine while she was pregnant, that had an influence on her offspring.
So a malnourished child goes on to have what conditions, or do we know for sure?
Well, there are a variety of different diseases that they were more susceptible to, cardiovascular disease and other psychological disorders. Yeah.
I can see us blaming all of this on, well, I'm this way because I was around tobacco smoke, or I'm this way because my mother didn't feed me enough.
Well, the wonderful thing, you touched on it earlier, this is not immutable. These things can change. And also, individuals can respond to these situations differently. We talked about resilience as well as being susceptible to stress. So this is not a life sentence because if you happen to inadvertently be exposed to smoke at an early age. I mean, it can have an influence, but there are other factors that can intervene to offset those effects.
Like what? Because most of us were raised, I don't know about you, I was raised in a smoky bar and a smoky car. Everybody in my household smoked. No one told us not to.
Well, I was fortunate that I lived in a smoke-free house. So,
that's why you're so smart.
I don't think so. You're pretty sharp. So the factors that may offset these epigenetic changes are probably largely nutritional. But also, again, being in a supportive environment. This is the amazing thing that social factors. We're getting away from this sharp delineation between physiology and environment and psychology. These things intermix.
Yeah, it's a mind-body medicine,
absolutely.
isn't it?
And
It's
we have
what
to
you
really,
eat,
yeah.
how you function, how you're raised.
Yeah, and it's a holistic approach. It's not, and that's not, you know.
Right, but the point is it's hard science.
Precisely. Yeah.
Which is different than a Deepak Chopra coming to town and talking with us about our minds and our bodies and how interrelated they are, and if you have a cancer cell gone wrong, how that is much more complicated than you initially think.
Yeah, but again, the fact remains that, you know, how we think is a product of how our brain functions. And then how we think can influence how our brain functions. So even those things are interwoven.
So
But-
thoughts are real forces.
Yes, indeed.
If you're a positive thinker, are you likely, this is too simple a question, are you likely to be healthier?
Well, I would think so.
It would kind of make sense,
Yes.
but because you handle stress better and you're happier, it does not mean you won't have some kind of chronic illness.
Not at all. I mean, again, it depends on some of these severe environmental factors
Right.
that you may encounter in life.
But you do believe, or I'm thinking you believe, that cells have a memory.
Yes, cells do indeed have a memory, and our ability to have a memory is due to the fact that our brain cells are plastic and can change their connections.
Right.
There's no question about that.
So knowing what you know about all of this,
Yes.
what's changed in your life? Things you eat? Are you a vegetarian? Do you not drink? Do you try not to
I try not to.
drive
I
too
try
fast?
I try to enjoy life, but with that old adage of never doing things to excess. Yeah. But,
So
which for me,
balance.
I've got sort of the excess line, maybe way over here, but
Sure. But you're not studying superfoods necessarily.
no. I think, you know, if you become overly preoccupied with these issues, your whole life changes. And
Yes. Epigenetics goes from here to where? Once you understand the mechanisms of epigenetics, then what? What's the next step?
Well, you know, you've touched on some of the issues, and that is, you know, if we can identify major toxins in the environment, let's just stick with that and
Right.
show that they change this epigenome, which leads to perhaps a cancer or some other form of illness. Then you'd obviously want to know, you'd want to reduce the incidence of that chemical in the environment.
Pesticides.
Pesticide, absolutely. So I can see a whole new toxicology coming along where you look at how a new chemical might change the epigenome, because that in turn would imply that there would be changes in the structure of the body.
Right.
That could be,
Exposed to asbestos, exposed to diesel.
yeah, and there's already evidence, you know, bisphenol A, which is in plastics.
Right.
There's some evidence already showing that that's a very powerful means of changing the epigenome, and that might, you know, imply that
Sure.
this is dangerous.
But in a way, we're the test monkeys. I know your scientists are doing research on rats, but in a way, until they produce the water bottle and we start drinking out of it, until they say, you know what, pull those off the shelves.
Right.
They're
what-
changing our genes.
Right, but what now that we know this link between, say, a toxin in plastic, changing the epigenome, changing the cells in your body, we don't have to be guinea pigs anymore. We can actually run those new plastics through a toxicological test on a cell, not necessarily on an animal,
Right.
and see whether or not it has, dangers associated.
Okay, so that's the future.
That's one of the futures.
One of the futures. What
Another
else?
one, I think, is the ability, once we link, there's already 3 drugs that have been approved by the FDA, which reverse these epigenetic marks and are shown to be effective in extending life with rare blood diseases.
Really?
Yes, and so this holds out the promise of a pharmacology based on epigenetics, which might, reverse these changes.
Right, our next guest, as you know, had multiple myeloma.
Yes.
That's a rare cancer. Is
Absolutely.
that what you're talking about when you talk about a rare blood disease?
Yes, yes, and I don't know the condition of your next guest, but there are some experiments, and now there's FDA approval of a particular drug that will reverse these epigenetic marks and extend that individual's life.
And stem cell research is part of it or not?
Well, stem cells is not part of that, but stem cells are very much dependent on epigenetic changes to allow them to reprogram themselves and to form any any of the cells that make up the human body.
Sure.
That's all controlled by epigenetics.
And how do we know if it's happening to us?
The epigenetics or
Yes,
the
the epigenetics. I
It's
mean, it obviously is.
it's
but
undoubtedly
is there
happening
a
to
test
you.
we can take?
No. Well, you could actually, there is a test. I mean, one of the things we're embarking on is, now with my hat on from the CIHR, there's an international consortium has been formed called the International Human Epigenome Consortium. And this is intended to do is to map 1,000 epigenomes of the different cell types that are in the body. And so Canada will be joining this consortium, and hopefully we'll see the benefits of this in the next few years.
So it may complement Darwin's theory and it may not.
I think it will complement. This is not a discovery that's out to displace
Right.
Darwin. It's meant to complement and extend the implications
Sure.
of genetics.
But we are what we eat and absorb and
No
breathe
question.
and all of that.
That's what all this is really pointing to. You said earlier, is providing a sound scientific base to a lot of these more philosophical concepts that we've held to be true.
Very much so. Exciting work you do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Tony Phillips from the Brain Behavior Lab
Yes.
at UBC.